I have run out of ways in which I can express my disappointment over Zack Snyder's movies. And don't get me wrong, like, I am all for an artist experimenting. I support a director's right to fail. When they shoot for the stars, they may not make it, but at least they're trying something. I'm all for that. Like, as a film critic, I enjoy watching those experiments. But Rebel Moon just feels like an utter exercise in arrogance and self indulgence. It feels like Zack Snyder just gets money thrown at him and he's stopped caring about making something that actually matters to anyone except himself.
You think so?
I feel like even with every interview that I've seen, he talks about how, oh, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to make. I want to do something crazy for science fiction and go nuts. I want to. But then the end product just ends up being this complete and utter self indulgent mishmash of a mess.
My issues with the film just go down to it being such an amateur thing. In our review of the first part of Rebel Moon, like for me, this may seem small, but I feel like the most egregious bit of it all was the hippogriff thing. Zack Snyder puts a hippogriff in this. And if you don't know what a hippogriff is, it's a winged horse thing with the head of an eagle. But it feels like he didn't even have the decency to redesign it. He pulled imagery from, I'm going to say pulled imagery from Harry Potter because it looks like a Harry Potter hippogriff. He doesn't even go further back and to look at the original versions of what this mythical animal could look like. And he decides to give it a different name and treat it as if it's something that he found, that he designed, that he made up. And both parts of this movie have got those things where it feels like, oh, look at me, I'm doing laser swords. But laser swords have been done before and they're called sabers. And what the fuck are you talking about?
From the very opening of this film, you can tell that it completely misunderstands everything that science fiction is.
Yeah.
So this one opens with a narration by Anthony Hopkins, and he kind of catches you up on what's going on. And it's utter gibberish. It's just Anthony Hopkins phoning it in because someone gave him some cash to do this voiceover and play this part of a broken down robot. But everything he's saying is the idea of what I had science fiction was when I was a teenager. Oh, look, funky names for planets and characters
Yeah.
and war because I liked Star Wars. And none of it actually makes any coherent sense. But you know what? If you just plunk all of these things into a narrative and set it in the future or in space, it can be science fiction.
Yeah.
I think I've stopped being angry at these things, if only because I'm now struggling to understand why someone or some studio or some fans would think that this is good.
We've gotten past the what is wrong with you, Zack Snyder, to the what is wrong with you, Netflix.
I don't get how anyone watching this would go, oh, you know what? This is an exceptional piece of science fiction. It's not even the kind of thing you might look back on in 20 years and go, I misjudged it when it came out, and this is now a cult classic. Because everything about this movie, like you said, Bahir, feels incredibly amateurish. Like all of the story beats. I mean, first of all, part two is exactly the same as part one. And
Yeah.
we're not saying this in a, oh, The Force Awakens has the same beats as A New Hope. No, 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 no. This is the exact same movie, just split into two parts. Every single story beat mirrors what happens in the first film. Maybe he took George Lucas's statement about everything being cyclical a little too literally.
No, but the problem is, this is that guy who learns about the hero's journey, and every piece of writing he does is a beat for beat interpretation of the hero's journey. You can stray off the path. You can try something. Heck, when you're Zack Snyder, the hero doesn't even have to have a journey. You could try something. But this movie doesn't try anything. And I think that is the most frustrating, right? Like, this was Snyder's pitch for a Star Wars film. Is that confirmed?
It is confirmed. Zack Snyder has said so himself.
Okay, so, well, then Kathleen Kennedy did the right thing by not making this movie, because it's a terrible movie. It's got nothing. It tells me nothing about anything.
The story feels incredibly pedestrian, and we mentioned this when we were reviewing part 1 as well. Essentially, the story sounds like someone who watched Star Wars, was inspired by it, and then decided to write his own version, but then also watched The Lord of the Rings and The Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy and all of these other movies, and then kind of mishmashed it up into this big homage inspired by mess.
And the problem is, when you're a nameless, unknown fella online on Reddit dropping this as fanfic, that's fine. I think most people can just ignore it. But when you're Zack Snyder dropping this much money on it and pretending like you've discovered sliced bread, please fuck off and die.
Like, that's my biggest problem with it. My biggest problem with this pair of movies is how much money was actually spent on it. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it is just a complete and utter lack of oversight on the part of Netflix, just like what happened with the Duffers in Stranger Things Season 4, where, they had tremendous success with that show, and so they were just allowed free reign to do whatever they want, or with the Russos and the Gray Man. And I am a firm believer, whether it comes to filmmakers or writers or musicians, that the editor is one of the most important individuals in your creative process. I've seen situations where an entire movie becomes something completely different because of an edit.
Yes.
And because of how an editor approaches the footage and actually puts it together. And when that oversight isn't there, then you end up with all of these decisions where an auteur refuses to kill his darlings. And I think we're going to see even more of that when the director's cuts of this come out. And everything about this movie, every story beat, just feels unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like, this could have been a 2.5 hour single film.
Yes.
When you're watching part 2, there are extended sequences of wheat harvesting, which go on forever, seemingly forever, but they don't actually do anything new. And they don't tell you anything. After the wheat harvesting, everyone literally sits down around a dinner table and has flashback expositions of what their backstories are in order to explain their motivations for joining Cora on her quest to take down the bad guys. It is the most painful thing I have ever seen. Literally, someone goes, yes, my people died a painful death and I feel guilty and responsible. Head down, shoulders shrugged. And then the person next to Jimon Honsu goes, well, I have a sad story too. It's the worst writing.
Like, I feel like none of it is necessary. You know why? You know why, Uma? Because we just saw a 2.5 hour movie of the bad guy attacking these guys. That should be enough for you to want to fight back. I don't need to know that your entire race of people were killed. I don't need to know that you saw your mother jump off the side of a building.
You've established that he's an asshole.
Yeah, we've proven that he's an asshole. We've proven that because he tried to shoot your fucking head off. That should be more than enough for you to want to go on this mission. I don't need to know that your planets have all disintegrated.
But all of this, for me, kind of reinforces why those original 3 Star Wars movies were so good. And why the writing was so good. We make fun of George Lucas for those prequels. And we talk about how he kind of went off the rails because he went straight up universe building, right? And sacrificed a lot of the cool story and narrative aspects for the sake of building out the bigger Star Wars galaxy. But those original 3 movies are genius. When you watch A New Hope, you have no exposition, barely any exposition as to who Leia is or Luke is or Han is, and yet you understand their motivations completely. You know exactly why they're in this fight.
It's not even the fight. That shot of Luke Skywalker outside his hovel looking at the two suns setting. You know he wants adventure. That's it.
Enough.
Right? John Williams' music sort of picks you up off your seat and just goes, yeah, see, Luke wants to go on an adventure. He's bored. That's all I need to know. Which is why later on, when I find out that Luke kisses Leia, you're like, what? They're siblings? It becomes special. I don't need to know that, oh, you've got a long lost twin sister somewhere out there in the universe. I don't need all that. You can use those pieces of information to make the story interesting later. I don't need a flashback to when they were born and Queen Amidala's dying on the bed. I don't need that in this movie. I didn't need it in the subsequent film it shows up in, but it's fine.
But even the story beats that lead you to part 2 feel like they've been overdone and actually undermine everything that happens in this movie. If you take Ed Skrine's character, Atticus Noble, he is set up as a real vicious bastard, right?
Yeah.
He shows up in part 1 and he is a little terrifying because he looks like a Nazi general.
Yep.
Because obviously all of Zack Snyder's symbolism is very, very fucking obvious. Anyway, he shows up, looks like a Nazi general, and you're like, damn, this guy is scary. The problem is, at the end of that first movie, Cora kicks his ass. Cora kicks his ass, leaves him for dead. So by the time he shows up in the second movie, you're like, oh well, she's beat him once. She can beat him again. It's not like he suddenly has power armor. He's just been resurrected in some chrysalis cocoon-like thing. And he's still the same guy, only this time he has a scar on his chest. And that's it. So you're like, well, I'm sure she can beat him this time as well. Meanwhile, if you take those original 3 Star Wars movies, first movie, Death Star blows up. But that second movie, Vader comes back with a vengeance. Kidnaps his best friend, chops off Luke's arm. They lose on Bespin. And at the end of that movie, you think, oh shit, our heroes are in trouble. How are they going to get out of this one? And you're scared because Vader is a scary guy. So even the story beats that Snyder sets up undermines what he's trying to do, because in this movie, I wasn't afraid of Atticus Noble at all. I was just like, hey, it's just a regular guy screaming from a spaceship in space. Whatever.
He hasn't come back upgraded. Even the lamest of video games know if you're going to bring back a boss, you give him metal armor. You do something with him, right? Or you tell him not to get off the ship. Something has to be different. Here, he's the exact same guy, just with a scar and just as much of a bitch this time.
Also, I feel like all of the symbolism in this movie is just annoyingly obvious. It reaches that point where unless you're 12 and haven't seen anything in your life, then this might surprise you.
Yeah.
But if you've seen any movie or read any Shakespeare, then nothing here is remotely original or interesting in any way.
Can I just jump in quickly? I have not read any Shakespeare and none of this is surprising.
But you are aware of Julius Caesar. So when the assassination of the king happens, you're like, oh my God, could you be any more obvious?
My anger has dissipated. I'm unwell and I'm coming out on the other side of just like, can somebody check on Zack Snyder? Is he okay? Maybe he wasn't trying to hide the fact that it was a Julius Caesar homage. You know what I mean? Like, maybe he was trying to be obvious. Maybe the idea of a ruler of a nation getting killed by 1,000 stabs by the people he trusted was what he wanted. But then again, this movie costs $166 million. You're Zack Snyder. You're not a first-time filmmaker. Maybe try something else.
It's at that point where it just feels boring.
It's not just boring. It's just that it's... Okay. I've come back around. You know what the problem is with that Julius Caesar sequence? He tries to make it look cool. And I think that's the difference, right? If you just do it as a people stabbing the guy and you go like, oh, like Julius Caesar, that's fine. But no, he draws it out. It's in super slow motion. Everybody's betrayal is shown in close-up. He really makes it seem as if this is his thing. Like, oh, look what I've come up with.
And of course, Bahir, there are musicians in the background that just keep playing throughout the assassination. Because why? Because that, my friend, is cinema.
Cinema. You know, I mean, a musician's got to work, right? Gigs must be hard to get there.
Ah,
Keep playing. I don't know, man. I feel like on the Wikipedia page where it says Rebel Moon is inspired by the works of Akira Kurosawa is an insult to Akira Kurosawa.
yes.
I feel like I want to try and become an editor of this page just so I can constantly remove the words Akira Kurosawa from here because this is insulting. This is not a great film.
I think it's insulting to Kurosawa. I think it's insulting to heavy metal. I think it's insulting to Star Wars, to Guardians of the Galaxy, to all of these better movies that it's based on that serve to remind you how great those movies actually are. I was bored out of my mind. And then, of course, after the first movie, in all of his interviews, Zack Snyder talks about how the second movie is no holds barred. It's balls to the wall. It's all action. And we get to that action. After the wheat harvesting, the action happens. Like the last hour of the film is an extended battle sequence, right? However, the best action movies or the best action in movies use action to drive story and build character. Nothing happens within these action sequences. You don't learn anything new. It doesn't push the story forward in any way. It is literally just aesthetic. And even then, it's not that aesthetic either. It feels like Snyder has lost that touch too because it was boring. It wasn't even cool.
It feels like the writing wanted those fight sequences to be the culmination, right? You've seen, what is it now, 4 hours worth of a movie at this point. So this is the big battle. This is the point where you're supposed to go, rah, get off your seat and just be like, this is so exciting. I'm so hard right now. But it doesn't. The fight sequences aren't exciting. Like you said, they're not a culmination of anything because fuck, this movie just keeps telling you that there's a battle happening. So I'm always ready for that battle. And when it comes, it's just meh, okay.
But also, when the battle comes, this time, of course, it's on Velt, this planet with villagers who they recruit to help them in their rebellion, right? But when that battle comes, there are so many nameless, faceless characters that none of them actually matter to you. And even the main characters who are recruited in this Magnificent Seven style recruitment thing in the first movie, when they die or when they perish, it also doesn't matter because you don't get any kind of triumphant, heroic moment. Like, that's what you want in these things, right? And none of it delivers. Also, is it just me or does it look cheaper than the first movie? Like, there feels like the visual, cinematic scope of it is smaller. The colors feel a little more cloudy.
It feels like this was shot on a set. Like those battle sequences feel like they were shot on the volume.
But also the logic of it doesn't make any sense. And that for me kept pulling me out of the film. Like big starship comes to this small village, little village. Like there are 3 buildings in this village and hardly anyone, right? You could bombard the shit out of it from space and you would be done. But no, you send in ground troops. Fine. Maybe your logic is I want to capture Korra.
Oh no, but Uma, you forget because Jimon Honsu's General Titus was clever enough to put all the food in the building. So they can't blow up the buildings, Uma.
Can't blow up the buildings.
Because
Yay.
food is there. Yeah.
And then they send in ground troops. But even when they send in ground troops, they don't send in their destroyers first. No. They send in a whole bunch of people in a horde to get mowed down before they send in the heavy artillery. None of this military strategy makes sense. Even if you don't understand military strategy, I'm sure you've seen enough war movies to have it make any kind of logical sense. But it doesn't. And so it keeps pulling you out of the film because you're like, what is going on? Why are all these people sacrificing themselves? Why are the bad guys such dummies? They could clear out these hapless farmers in no time at all.
Yeah.
I've gone past angry, man. I've gone past angry. I've gone past disappointed. Now I'm just dumbstruck. I'm dumbfounded at Hollywood studio executives.
Oh, I disagree. I feel like Netflix are the only people who will give Zack Snyder money to make stuff. Like, he's got, obviously, at the end of this one, you find out that the movie isn't over, that there's more to come. And I recently found out that he's got an animated series coming out with Netflix.
Apparently so. More Rebel Moon stuff.
More Rebel Moon stuff and an animated series based on the retelling of the Norse gods, I think, or something. And it's just like, wow, Netflix, you're really just like, I can't see anybody else. Like, this is M. Night Shyamalan jail kind of thing.
Like, I think Warner's done, right? Because Warner's not going to give $250 million and then a marketing budget of another $250 million because they know that while Zack Snyder has pull, he doesn't have the kind of pull that's going to recuperate that money at the box office. Meanwhile, you can get 10, 20 million people watching this on Netflix because they've already paid for the subscription. It doesn't matter to them. They're not going to have to go out and buy a movie ticket. They've already got the subscription. They might click play for about 20 minutes, maybe.
Netflix doesn't care that you press play and went to sleep. You know what I mean?
True.
Like, they don't give a shit. Yeah.
They don't care if you're fast forwarding through the boring bits either.
They don't care. They're not going to tell anybody that people have done that, but they don't care. I can't see any other like, do you think Universal's going to get in bed with Zack Snyder? You think, I mean, Disney and Marvel are definitely not going to get in bed with Zack Snyder, but is Zack Snyder going to be able to come up with something for Sony to do?
I don't think so.
Blumhouse? You know what I mean? Like, I don't see it. I feel like Zack Snyder has to be really, really nice in his emails to Netflix because they're the only fish in town right now.
You know what's interesting as a comparison? It'll be interesting to compare Zack Snyder and Michael Bay. I think oftentimes they're spoken about with similar rhetoric, but I do believe Michael Bay is a far superior filmmaker.
Oh, absolutely.
I think Michael Bay has tropes. He has a set style, just like Snyder, but I think he can deliver on other things. I think he delivers well because he relies on other writers. He relies on the people around him to be able to craft an actual film, so much so that it doesn't feel self-indulgent.
And I think that a Michael Bay film is the one thing that a Zack Snyder film hasn't been since 300. A Michael Bay film is fun.
That's true.
You know, like, it's not going to make perfect logical sense. It's not going to make perfect plot sense, but it'll be fun.
I'll correct you there. I think Sucker Punch.
I mean, yeah, you and
Sucker
I
Punch
like
was
Sucker Punch.
fun.
I think a lot of people didn't. So I'm going to go further back to 300, which is the more widely accepted Zack Snyder fun movie.
But can you even consider that a Zack Snyder movie when all he did was recreate exactly what was on the page? At least with Sucker Punch.
You say that. He fucked up Batman versus Superman.
That's true.
You know, like, he could have followed that comic page for page.
To be fair, though, that was a more complex narrative. I think with 300, it was really basic.
Oh, it was super basic. I'd be surprised if you read the script, but you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's the problem. I think Zack Snyder's films are so much for Zack Snyder and the Zack Snyder bros that his films become so full of itself. It's so full of, look at me, I'm cool. Look at this slow-mo bit because it's cool. I don't know what to do here, so let's have random folk music over people harvesting. Like, I swear to God, if those people started breaking out into song and singing as they're harvesting, I'm decrying communism.
There was already bullshit Tolkien-esque singing in the background. That drove me up the fucking wall, dude.
If they suddenly the people started singing as they're harvesting, and I'd be like, wow, Stalin's back, guys. And you know what? Okay, just random aside. I was scrolling through YouTube last night, and you know the slow-mo guys?
Yes.
The YouTube channel? So they had Zack Snyder on. And they were just sort of talking to him and just like talking about slow motion and all Zack Snyder's use of slow-mo in his films, specifically 300. And I was just watching it going like, Zack Snyder in person feels like such a fun guy. Because he was so excited talking about the technology and how He had come up with it when he was doing a Gatorade commercial, which is how he then implemented it into 300.
Oh,
He
for
feels
sure.
so bubbly and light and full of life. And then you watch his movies and you go, what the fuck?
Yeah.
You know what it is? It almost feels like he has to make these movies because the Snyder Bros expect this dark, gloomy, just like pissed off at the world kind of films. But he just likes, he likes ponies and rainbows.
Every time I see an interview with Zack Snyder, I'm almost tricked into wanting to rewatch his movies because he seems like such a personable dude.
Yeah.
And he seems like a really knowledgeable dude, which I'm sure he is. It just doesn't seem to translate to what he's trying to do on screen. And I don't understand where that disconnect comes from.
I think the disconnect comes from an expectation of a Zack Snyder film. Like, I'd love to see Zack Snyder do a rom-com. Like, I'd fucking run to the cinemas for that shit. I'd buy a hall just to watch that on my own, right? Because I want to see what he does. Because I want to see him translate that personable personality to screen. But I'm done. I kind of almost feel like I'm done with Zack Snyder films now.
I don't know what the ranking was over the weekend, but I checked earlier today. And in Malaysia, Rebel Moon is number 3 on their top 10. Do you know what the number 1 and 2 movies are?
Oh, go on.
And I think this is what hurts the most. Number 2, Jurassic World, Dominion. Okay, that's fine. That's great, right? Number 1, J2, J Retribusi.
Oh, yeah.
If a Zul Arifin ripoff of Police Evo is the number 1 movie over Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, which Netflix has been promoting the shit out of. Actually, to be fair, I think after the performance of Part 1,
Yeah, I don't think they
Netflix
did.
has done nothing in Malaysia, right?
Yeah.
There is absolutely no marketing effort. I don't
No.
even see billboards up. Who knows? Maybe they might spend some money and stick some posters up in an alleyway in Bangsa,
Yeah,
like they did the last time.
because, grunge.
Maybe that might help. But number 3. And so I think it's landed on Netflix with a whimper. And I don't know if he's going to get a chance to make Part 3. But the other big problem with Part 2 is that it doesn't end. Yet
Yeah.
again, it's just a really lame setup for yet another sequel. Oh, that person you thought was dead for these 2 movies, turns out she's not.
Just on that. You showed said person getting shot. Sure, we don't see a hole in the body. Sure, we don't see the body getting dropped into the ground, whatever. But she got shot. Just let her die.
That act of her getting assassinated by your hero makes your hero a lot more interesting.
It was the only interesting bit that drove me, right? It was the only interesting bit about Korra's backstory. Was that she was trying to redeem herself.
And then it's a cop-out. Don't even get me started on all of this setup for fucking Jimmy the Robot and Anthony Hopkins, and then
Fuck off!
having him do absolutely nothing. You know what? I'm a little robot. I'm just going to hang around here and watch hundreds of people get slaughtered the whole time before I actually do something. Hey, Jimmy, maybe if you had shown up 10 minutes earlier, this would be done now.
Also because there was such a... Maybe it was me just hoping for it, but I felt like there was... Like this robot Jimmy was going to be some ghost in the shell, right? He's going to be a thing. He's got a nuclear thing inside him. He's got a magic penis. I don't know. I thought he was going to do something, right? Is this robot with antler horns on his head because he's gone native? What the fuck? But nothing. The robot does fuck all.
He's set up at the end of the last movie as having a significant role to play.
Yeah.
Because the epilogue of the last movie makes you think that Jimmy is going to be an important character in this one. And then nothing. Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, is a whole bunch of nothing. You may already have seen it because it dropped last week on Netflix. If you have, let us know your thoughts. Reach out. All of our social media feeds, Goggler MY. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or just send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. We didn't like it. We don't recommend you waste your time. There are plenty of other things worth watching. But if you have, we're curious to know, especially if you're a Snyder fan, we're curious to know if this movie or these two movies are defensible as works of art.
Belisarius wasn't even in the second movie.
Only in the flashback, lah.
Only in the flashback.
When the king was killed. Yep.
Fuck off.
Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.